Hello, everyone. On behalf of Geo Institute, it is my honor to welcome you all to this fireside chat on reimagining higher education in a post pandemic world. We are humbled to have received participation across age groups, sectors, designations from academia, industry, and government for this chat. Our participants comprise 23 states and 5 union territories of India, as well as 17 other countries around the globe. Once again, a very warm welcome to you all. The effects of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic have been evident across geographies and sectors. We've all experienced different ways of working, learning, and living. In many ways, we've had to embrace a new normal, one that's given rise to opportunities and thrown new curveballs. The higher education sector is arguably one of the most pandemic affected ones. The influx of online, topsy-turvy academic timelines, new pedagogical methods, conducting exams, economic impacts, as well as navigating the dented job market are just some of the factors that higher education institutes across the world have to reckon with. This session will focus on some of these issues, understand current dynamics, explore different opportunities and pathways that have emerged, and accordingly, strategize and ensure a sustainable and equitable higher education future. Before we begin the chat, I'd like to invite Dr. Deepak Jain, Vice Chancellor of Geo Institute, to deliver his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Good morning, or I would just say good day to everyone. And let me offer my welcome to everyone joining this fireside chat. I feel deeply honored to be part of this new institute called the Geo Institute. And having worked at many institutions, I learned one thing: very few people in life get the honor to start something from scratch. And Geo Institute is one such endeavor initiated by Mr. and Mrs. Ambani. The way I look at Geo Institute is a true reflection of giving back to society. I remember when I was a student in Assam, our teacher used to quote Swami Vivekananda with the following saying of his, that if students cannot come to you, you need to go where the students are. A lot of us had the privilege of coming to countries like US, UK for higher studies, but not every Indian may have the resources or the abilities in sense of reach to connect with such institutions. The vision of the Ambani family is how we create a world-class institution in India. And the way you create world-class institution is by focusing on what I call input, throughput, and output. Input is getting the top students. Throughput is the curriculum and faculty. And output is the quality of recruitments and the quality of alumni that we build over time. We are also very privileged today to have, and he will be formally introduced, but a person, Dr. Pradeep Kosler, who in my mind has been an icon. Very few of us, we came to US, joined top institutions, established our credibility as a good researcher and teacher, but very few of us get to head academic institutions. And Dr. Khosla was the dean of one of the most prestigious engineering schools or universities of the world, Carnegie Mellon, and now the chancellor. I don't know whether there are very few people of Indian origin to reach that echelon in life. And one thing I like about him is he speaks his mind. And not only a mind, a beautiful mind with absolute clarity. And you all will enjoy listening to him. But as I always say that when you created institutions, the three dimensions of institutions are academic excellence, getting the best faculty to come, business relevance, whatever we teach should have relevance to the real world, and third is social significance, and social significance is your feeling of giving back. We would like to have people join this institute who would not only become successful in their life, but think of giving back to the mother country. My aim of joining this institution, I personally describe my journey as a journey from success to significance. Having been the Dean of the Kellogg School, then the Dean of INSEAD in France, and now as the President of China-Europe International Business School. And I know I'm taking too much time, but I will just share a small story. November 19th, 1962, China attacked India. And they came from the northeastern part of India. In those days, it used to be called NEFA, Northeast Frontier Agency. Today, we call it Arunachal Pradesh. And when they crossed the mountains, the area called Taiwan, Bomdila, the very first town is a town called Tejpur, where I was born and raised. And then 1962, I was just in a kindergarten class, 5 years old. And I remember that morning, the teacher came to the class around 11 a.m. and said, the Chinese army is less than 50 kilometers from the school. The government has asked us to vacate the town by 7 p.m. You're trying to reach your parents. We ran as refugees that night. And in those days, there was no bridge on river Brahmaputra. We crossed next morning. It took us 8 days to come to Rohtak, Haryana, where my grandparents were living. 55 years later, November 2017, one of those refugees was announced as the president of the top business school in China. I attribute this to our sanskars, to the quality of education I received in India. I owe this to my teachers and everyone attending today's chat. I would only say we all are blessed to have the Indian roots in us. And today, the showers of blessings are going to be much stronger when you listen to a distinguished fellow called Pradeep Kosler. Thank you all. Welcome to this event. And I wish you the very best on your journey ahead. Enjoy the talk.
Thank you, sir. As always, your words are inspirational to all of us. We will now begin with our fireside chat. So as the term suggests, the session will be an informal discussion between both speakers. After the session, we'll take questions from the audience. So I request all participants to keep submitting your questions as the session progresses in the Q&A tab. In the interest of time, please keep your questions very brief so that we can take as many of them as possible. I'd now like to introduce to you Dr. Vanita Sharma, who is the Advisor Strategic Initiatives at Reliance Foundation. Dr. Sharma has more than 20 years of international experience in various sectors across corporates, academia, and charitable foundations. She has completed a graduation, master's, and doctorate from the University of Oxford, and was also awarded the Scholar of Peace Fellowship by the Dalai Lama Foundation. So I'll hand it over to her now. Over to you, ma'am.
Great, thank you, Sunshine, and thank you, Dr. Jain, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I think as Sunshine was saying, we've got a fantastic audience with us today with over 18 countries, and we're really looking forward to having an engaging discussion about some of the key trends that have been emerging in India and globally in higher education and what the future might look like. And I'm really, delighted and honoured to introduce you all to Dr. Pradeep Kosler. He is an internationally renowned electrical and computer engineer. He's the 8th Chancellor of the University of California, San Diego, and a distinguished professor. He initiated and led UC San Diego's first ever strategic plan, and he recently launched the public phase of the campaign for UC San Diego, an ambitious and bold $2 billion endeavor aimed at transforming the university physically and intellectually. And prior to this, Dr. Khosla served as the Dean of the College of Engineering and as the Philip and Marcia Dowd University Professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Khosla is also a member of the Governing Council for the Geo Institute. So Dr. Khosla, very, very warm welcome, and I'm really...
Ma'am, you've gone on mute.
Oh, sorry. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to you this evening and this morning, your time. So thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Dr. Sharma. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. And thank you, Dr. Jain, for your both enlightening and extremely kind, and if I may, this is exaggerated words of compliments for me. So thank you.
No, I mean it sincerely. Like you speak your mind, I do mine.
So Dr. Khosla, I think to start, it would be wonderful to just hear a little bit more about your personal story and your journey. I think, you know, that's an inspiration for us all. So please tell us a little bit more.
You know, I thought I had an exciting story until I heard Dr. Jain, and there's nothing as inspirational as that. So my story now, compared to what he said, turns out to be more benign and simple. So I was born technically in Amritsar because I was just born there. But I was brought up in Mumbai, what's called Mumbai now, Bombay. And at age 18, when I had a chance to go to IIT, I chose the one that was the farthest so that I had no relatives in the vicinity. So I didn't have to go visit anybody. So from Mumbai, I went to Kharagpur, and that was probably one of the best choices I made in my life. So I finished in 1980, then I worked for a couple of years in Bangalore and Mumbai. And then I realized that if I had to do research or wanted to do research, then I had to leave the country. So I came to the US to basically pursue my higher education at Carnegie Mellon. Interestingly, I came here to pursue, at that time, what I thought was going to be a very interesting future, which is computer control of power systems. When I was in Tata Consulting and Siemens, I used to go to TIFR every other day to run simulations on the computer out there for, designing like protection schemes for power systems. But I come here, I realized that what we in India were like 10, 15 years behind. And the professor said, I don't do that anymore. I do robotics now. That's a new thing. I said, okay, I'll do that. What can I say? And this goes back to what Dr. Jain was saying, as somebody who was of Indian origin, who lived in Mumbai, understood how life worked and was willing to take risks and make choices. It was a great risk I took. It was an amazing choice I made. And lo and behold, here I am now.
Fantastic. And Dr. Khosla, I think, technology definitely has been, very much at the, the heart of how we've all really survived over this last year, and no less so within the higher education sector. And I think before we move on to sort of talking about what the future might look like, it would be great to sort of hear your reflections and thoughts on, the last year and what it's been like in the higher education sphere, and what some of your key learnings have been.
Yeah, let me make a couple of observations. So before last year, I would complain, other parents would complain that the kids, I'm talking about young kids and teenagers, were basically buried their faces in their laptops or iPhones or iPads. And, I had to send messages to my kid, even though they were in the next room, because they would not talk to me directly. Then the pandemic happens. And a year after the pandemic now, I realized that people actually felt the lack of human connection and human connectivity. So now when I meet people for the first time in 12, 16, 18 months, they actually want to not just shake my hand, they want to hug me. They want to, and vice versa, by the way, and we want to be together, right? So that was one thing I learned, that the human connections, the human connectivity is extremely important. Now, during the pandemic, what I learned was that people who were initially down on online delivery of education, who were down on IT infrastructure and a whole lot of social media. Literally overnight, I closed the campus one morning, and next day, everybody is using Zoom to deliver courses. So this tells me a little bit about the ability of the human mind and the human being to adapt extremely fast. When survival becomes an issue, we adapt extremely fast. So that was a second big lesson for me. Now, we were one of the campuses in the country, Vanita, that had about 10,000 students here every day during the pandemic, the largest campus presence ever. And we had zero breakouts. And my biggest fear when we started this population process and during and after was that the students are going to behave badly. And my neighborhood would say, wait a second, you're going to kill us all because these kids are going to come here and make everybody sick. What I learned was these students were exemplars of great behavior, of responsible behavior. We had zero breakouts, zero outbreaks in
That's brilliant.
months, right? So it was some combination of strategy and technology and execution. But I'm telling you, the real biggest contributor was the individual behavior was truly exemplar. So.
And Dr. Khosla, I mean, how did your students manage in the last year? I think we'll move on to sort of education in a moment, but just socially as well, because one of the big aspects of university education is that, you know, building up that sense of community, getting to know and meet new people, and especially for first years, you know, it has been a really challenging year for them. How did they manage? How did the university support them?
I think it was pretty difficult for them, to be honest with you. They would hang out with each other, but they'd be wearing masks and socially distanced. It was not as easy as just holding hands and being together in close proximity and going out to eat and spend the evenings and stuff like that. But it was better than not seeing each other. And I think the biggest part for many of them was that they were able to be away from home. So just to give you some context, about 40% of our students are like what we call Pell Grant recipients. These are like low-income students, most likely first generation. They live in like crowded quarters, you know, like 2 bedrooms might be a family of 4 or so. And when you're all on Zoom, it's not easy to get private quarters. So these people here on our campus, there was only 1 person per room, end of story. We had no doubles, no triples, nothing. So they had private quarters, they had high-speed internet, we upgraded the whole infrastructure very fast. So I think there were positives and there were negatives. So clearly lack of social contact, adequate social contact was down, but it was better than no social contact at all. And we saw this in our access to mental health facilities. There was more mental health issues than one would expect.
That's great, and I think that's really lucky. I mean, in a lot of universities, in you know, in India and in other parts of the world, I think, you know, there hasn't been that opportunity to you know, experience a physical campus this year, and I think it definitely is something that students are missing and looking forward to, you know, when things improve. What are your thoughts on the sort of the future of the physical campus as we emerge, you know, post-pandemic?
I, you know, personally, I'm a contrarian in many ways. I think the future of the physical campus is about as strong as it was before the pandemic. I don't see it going away. You know, most of the times, people confuse undergraduate education with just content acquisition, as in, you know, why can you not just do everything online? There's nothing wrong. You can do everything online. But people forget that during that 18 through 23 or 17 through 23 or 24 time period, you're growing socially, you're growing psychologically, you're growing emotionally, you're forming your political opinions. So there's a whole lot of internal transformations happening in the human, in the adolescent human, that really cannot happen just by living alone in a family, right? Now, having said that, I do fully realize that a lot of people in India will never experience education in a residential manner, but they do have other interactions in the evening with other people more than just their family.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that most students are looking forward to, being able to have that opportunity back again. Yeah,
Right.
especially the first.
I think as educators, we need to be careful. As much as I think that online is here to stay, I just think it would be a mistake to think that's the only way of delivering education and life would be good. We would end up raising a lacking generation, I think. We need to be more holistic in what we provide them in terms of their growth.
So do you think that we'll start to see, in the future, more sort of varied models of delivery for higher education, where we may have like a mixture of both face-to-face education degrees, blended learning opportunities, where it's more of a mix, and pure online? And I know all of these three strands existed for us pre-2020 as well, but do you see them sort of evolving in a different way post-pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I see a combination of online and in-person education progressing simultaneously, but I also see a lot more technology being injected into education. So we've talked a lot about, for example, interactive textbooks. We still don't have interactive textbooks. So I can imagine an online course, which is like reading a textbook, except I can click on a figure and the simulation starts running, or I can click on a picture and the professor starts talking about the paragraph. So a whole lot of more nuanced, sophisticated delivery of education, more interactive. I also see a lot of not AI, but also augmented reality injected into something as simple as a Zoom call. Right now, it's all two-dimensional. I see your picture, you see my picture, but being a little bit more interactive, a little bit more augmented reality to enhance the experience, right? So I see a lot of excitement in this area.
And I think, as you said, Dr. Khosla, I think one of the things that's been really heartening, and it's been a difficult and challenging year for everybody over the last 12 months plus. But one of the things I think that has been really heartening is the pace of digital acceleration that we've seen, and as you said, virtually happening overnight, which really shows the potential for change and transformation
Right.
in the future. I'd like to delve a little bit deeper in terms of how we can potentially see technology, shaping higher education in the future, particularly around admissions and also examinations, which I think has been a space that universities around the world have really had to grapple with and try and find quick solutions to. But as we start to I keep saying it and hoping it's going to be true soon, that we emerge post-pandemic. I think it gives us the opportunity to also just take a step back and find more nuanced solutions on this. So would love to hear your thoughts on admissions and also exams.
So look, admissions clearly is a big issue. I'll give you an example of my own university. So we, this year, the year we are in right now, had 140,000 applications for 9,000 seats starting in September 2021. Now 140, and this year, by the way, also we abolished the SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is a test which gives you like numerical scores in various sections, right? We abolished that. So it's all very qualitative now. It's your grades, it's your recommendation letters, it's your statement of purpose, and so on and so forth. Reading 140,000 applications and being adequately fair is nearly impossible. So we had to literally hire, 200-300 people to read these applications, train them, score them, grade them. And then based on that, we made a decision. But I can imagine a big role, for example, for AI in basically reading these applications. We already have AI applications, so the applications of AI where they can read books, and then they can, based on reading books, they can write a book, right? And you cannot tell the difference. It looks like a human being wrote the book. So I can imagine an AI is created to read these applications and score them, and then augmented by human touch on top of it. This would be actually a great business, to be honest with you, because everybody in the country needs it. The same would be true for examinations. It used to be that when we had too many papers to grade, we start giving true and false exams. Then we gave multiple choice so that there was a little bit more thinking involved. And now when you talk about writing ability and you talk about reasoning and critical thinking, and you have to write things and read that, it's impossible for a single faculty member to read like 500 answers, because a typical class is 500 people, right, or 500 papers, question and answer papers. So I can imagine the role of AI there too. So I think these are important concepts resulting in business models that could actually be lucrative and be very useful. And this would be very impactful, especially in countries like India, where 1,000 is not a good number. Tens of thousands is how you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Great. And how do you sort of, I mean, as you were saying, in your university, I think you said 40% of your students are, first generation learners, and similarly, in India, a growing number of students are coming into the higher education sector from families where they similarly are first generation learners, which is fantastic, and that's a key priority for the future in terms of increasing the accessibility of education and opportunities. I think very much in the this year, and also probably in the short term post pandemic, many of those students may struggle a little bit more due to the sort of the economic impact on their families as a result of the pandemic. And I think the other thing that has very much sort of come through in this last year has been the challenge of the digital divide. Just being able to afford access to the resources, whether that's access to data, devices, etc., to be able to access online learning has been a challenge, not just in countries like India, but the UK, where I'm from as well, and other countries around the world. So what do you think when we look at the future? What are some of the new things that we need to start thinking about, both in the immediate short term for the next couple of years, but also more longer term, in terms of how we support students who are first generation learners and try to continue to support them with access to the higher education sphere?
So I think, let me take a philosophical view. I think the simple answer to your question is like one word, which is access. In every country, we need to create more access. What has happened is the higher education has been created, quote unquote, as a service or as a capability, which is rationed in terms of how it is delivered to populations. So for example, when I went to school in India, there were 5 IITs. We all took the exam. Like the joke was like 100,000 people plus took the exam at that time, back in 1975. And only like 1,200 were accepted. And I happened to be one of those lucky ones, right? I think if you think about human population and think about talents and capabilities, they have a normal distribution. There are very smart people amongst the poor people. There are very smart people amongst the rich. There are not so smart amongst the poor. They're not so smart amongst the rich. So I can just go down the list of all the attributes. So limiting access only to the educated or people whose parents know what to look for, or people with resources, I think is losing out for a country, because you're not involving every person with talent in your economy. And education is a way to train and bring the person into the economy in a productive manner. So access, in my mind, is really important, which then tells me that in a country like India, so having an institute like GEO is extremely important, because India needs to have institutions in the top 100 in the world. And right now we don't. And GEO would be one of the few in India that would be in top 100 very soon. But we also need to have, I think in India, about 50 institutions in the top 100. We really need a lot more institutions. So the question is, how do you take a business model like creation of GEO, which is an expensive endeavor, and really scale it. And this is where I think the government needs to start investing more money into public education. So I'm a big fan of access. I'm not a great fan of rationing education. At least at the undergraduate level, it should be egalitarian.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's something that when you get it right, I mean, I think that's where you see the right. You just see even more talent emerging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's happening like in most countries, like US is working off of immigration. Japan, their average age is going up. China, the average age is going up. India has what the prime minister calls this youth, this great benefit because of the average age being low, right?
Yeah, the youth dividend.
The youth dividend. But we are going to waste it if we don't have access to education and training for these young people. And I'm concerned that right now we are more wasting it rather than exploiting it in a good way.
I think also, Dr. Khosla, what you were also touching on in terms of funding, I think as you probably know better than me, I mean, funding is going to be a key challenge for universities around the world in the coming years, and many of them have been impacted by the pandemic. What do you see the key things that universities and institutions of higher education need to think about in the future and in the immediate short term, I think, in terms of recovery from the pandemic?
So look, the issue is different amongst different countries, right? So in the US, there are quote unquote institutions that have very good ranking and not great capitalization, and they will do well, as in they don't have a great endowment. They also there are institutions that are mediocre, but they have great endowment, they'll also survive. I think the difficulty would be for institutions that are not at the cutting edge of their credibility and are not well capitalized as a good endowment, and they would be in trouble. And we've been seeing that at least for the past decade. But during the pandemic, we saw more institutions go under. So on one hand, this can be the dog eat dog model. If you cannot survive, fine, go under. But for a higher education institution to go under is not that easy, because you might have like 10,000 alumni who are carrying your degree. That at some point your degree becomes worthless because nobody knows that the institution existed, right? So I think we need to be very careful about how we deal with higher education institutions, and not just purely as a business, that as in create and destroy at a moment's notice. So as the chancellor, I have to make sure that my institution is not only at the top of its game, but also is financially well capitalized, doing extremely well, and very stable in its operations, so it can manage ups and downs relatively easily.
And Dr. Khosla, I mean, a key component for not just funding, but also the whole academic ethos of higher education is also on research. Again, another area that has been challenging over the last year, both for academics and students that are working on different types of research. But I think, whilst there have been challenges, technology also opens up, many more opportunities now for the future, both, within institutions, but also for collaboration between institutions, whether that's nationally or even internationally. What are your thoughts on the future of research?
So research will continue to play a very significant role in higher education. And research, in my mind, serves a few purposes. For a faculty member, it is a way to refresh your knowledge and to create and add to the existing knowledge base. So that's extremely important. For an undergrad student, I always tell undergrads, I said the best course you can ever take as an undergrad would be a research project with one of your faculty members. And they wonder, like, why do you say that? Because I'll end up dealing with graduate students. Well, that is one of the situations where the real problem would not be very clearly defined. The real solution would not be very obvious. And you would have to not only search in the library, but also ask questions of your colleagues to learn and extract knowledge and define or refine the problem statement, which is a skill in itself. How do you define and refine a problem statement? Then the next skill is that how do you address, create information that's needed to solve the problem? And none of this happens that easily in a course that is delivered by an instructor standing up or even online. This is best done by practice. So I think, so I'm a big fan of project-based courses, injecting research at the undergraduate level. And I think you end up with a better, as Dr. Jain says, better output at the other end, a better trained, educated student, more independent student.
Definitely. I mean, certainly for me, the research that I had the chance to do as an undergraduate, I mean, it was optional in our degrees, but you know, the skills and the experience that you gain from doing that, I think is you know, it's unrivaled. And it's, as you say, it's about putting your it's about putting all the skills that you're learning actually into action and starting to learn how to apply that and learn different modes of critical thinking.
Yep. You know, I see a lot of questions out here, pretty interesting ones. Have you been cracking?
Yeah, I think we've got some great questions that are coming through from the audience, and yeah, please do continue to share some more with us. And I think we were going to wait till a little bit later, but as you say, there's some brilliant questions coming through. So why don't I start to pick up on a few of them? So I think one of the questions that we've just had come in is, how do we ensure quality assessments in the online space? So how do we ensure that assessments are more authentic, given that the opportunities to cheat are very high?
You know, so look, I am not a big fan of willingly creating opportunities to cheat, but I'm also not a big fan of policing so strongly and assuming that everybody's a cheater, and given the opportunity, everybody will cheat. I think when people cheat in a class or in a test or during their education program, they're basically cheating from themselves. So I am a big fan of educating them and letting them know that cheating, you're only cheating from yourself. You're not cheating from me or from your neighbor.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that's the type of awareness we need to inject in people rather than create a police force on how not to, that's monitoring cheating. I'm a big fan of paper exams.
I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, and I'm also a big fan of open book exams. You know, my view is like, I have as much information as you want. I mean, I'm going to force you to think. And you cannot cheat if the exam forces you to think easily.
Absolutely. And just having the book by your side doesn't give you the answers.
Right.
Yeah. And what about when we look at academics and we look at you know, the years ahead for academics in you know, across the board, you know, this has been a year where everyone has very much had to upskill, learn new modes of teaching and connecting with their students, and again, another area where I think the pace of change and digital acceleration has been fantastic. I mean, if we look ahead to the next decade, what do you think are some of the things that academics will need to sort of focus on in terms of upskilling?
Clearly, you know, being on top of the technological developments that allow you to offer, like, make a seamless delivery of education, that would be one of them. Secondly, it would not be as much as in technology, but as in people interactions, you know, and even I myself find I have to, how should I say, reskill myself in terms of how do I read your face? How do I read your body language in a two-dimensional situation? And it's not that easy. So I also have to think about, to give you better understanding of my body language, what do? Do I nod my head more? Do I move my shoulders more? So there's a whole lot of new modes of social interaction that we cannot do without thinking about it. But I think it's going to become a body of knowledge where we will all have to start learning these modes of interaction now in 2 dimensions.
Definitely, and I think also, Dr. Khosla, as you were saying, when you do move back into the physical mode and more of actually being able to re-interact again in person, I think there's an element of relearning as well. So in terms of how we interact again in the real world.
Lately, absolutely.
Yeah. Which I definitely experienced yesterday. I'm in London at the moment and went to my first hybrid in-person event, and we all had to relearn the etiquettes of do we shake hands? Do we,
Right.
all of those small things.
The most difficult thing is going to be, everything Zoom we understand, everything in person we understand, but half the people in Zoom and the other half in person creates a psychological dissonance. So one has to understand the norms of behavior. Who do you look at? When do you look at? And what gestures you make in that situation?
Yeah, and it's not just like the video conference of old. It's a different way of interacting.
Yep, indeed.
So I think before we've got loads of brilliant questions coming in, and please do continue to send your questions, and we'll move on to those in a moment. But just one last question from me, Dr. Khosla. When you look at the future of higher education in India, what do you think are some of the the key opportunities and need areas that both current institutions of higher education as well as newer emerging ones like the Geo Institute should be thinking about and focusing on?
So I think we need to have something like the Geo Institute as an exemplar of what it means to be a very highly ranked, well-endowed, state-of-the-art institution that's integrating education and research and is, let's pick a number like top 100 or top 50 in the world. So we need several of those in India. We also want to make sure that education is not elitist, but is elite, as in it should be accessible to everybody. And I think having talked to the Ambani family and having heard Mr. Ambani speak, I can tell you that there's going to be more scholarships in this institute. It's going to be more egalitarian than any other place I know. I mean, the only other egalitarian place I know is IIT, but even that might be limited by if you come from an educated family, you understand how to take the test or not, right? But this is going to be a great model of going into the future. Now, if I was in the Indian government, in addition to creating such institutes of eminence, I would also focus on what we call the 2-3 year education, more the diploma courses, the trade courses, because we cannot underestimate the importance of these trades in terms of the economy. And these are not any lower than a BS degree or a master's degree. So I think in India, we have this hierarchy of education, as in, if you're good, you go for engineering, next you go commerce, next you go arts, next you go diploma. And we need to break this hierarchy. We need to make it completely flat and egalitarian and make sure people understand these are different forms of education for different pursuits that people choose in their life.
Definitely, and I think also looking at the opportunities for interdisciplinary learning as well. So one of the questions that's come through is somebody who's asking a major issue that is felt in undergraduate education in India is compartmentalization. So focusing on either just liberal arts or science degrees. And what are the opportunities where new institutes like the Geo Institute and also existing institutes can focus on in terms of breaking down some of those those divides and fostering that more interdisciplinary learning?
So I think, look, we know a couple of things. We know that the human brain has got the left side and the right side. We know that there's a class of pursuits that are more exercising the left side, and then others that more exercise the right side. The way we have dealt with education, as this person is saying, is more if you're doing BA in commerce, then you are basically taking only courses like finance, accounting, and so on and so forth. Whereas we need to exercise the whole brain, which means that during 4 years of education, there should be arts and humanities, social sciences, and engineering and technology all integrated. Now, I can see that your major, you spend more time in that as compared to the others, but to not spend any time on the others is a complete mistake. And I must tell you that coming from IIT, in 5 years, we only had like one course per semester, which was like a how should I say, engineering course. And even there, I cheated by taking more like psychology and stuff like that, rather than, the history of India, right, which was not a course. And when I came to the US, I realized that I already was more competent than the master's level courses out here, but I was also not so competent in terms of being creative, thinking creatively in terms of refining a problem, defining a problem, because I did not have these other skills which come from these other courses that are more arts and social sciences oriented, right? So I'm a big fan of very integrated, holistic education.
Yeah, I agree, because just it's not just the diversity of different subjects, but the diversity of thought and the different skills and critical thinking that it teaches you as well.
Right, and I think this is what is lost where we talk about holistic education. We talk about content acquisition, whereas I think in terms of exercising your brain differently and developing different styles of thinking, that is fundamentally what education is all about.
Yeah, and that's the skill that you may, years after you've finished your degrees, you may not remember every element of that that essay that you really studied your heart out for weeks and weeks, and that particular specialist subject you studied. But what stands you in good stead are the critical thinking skills that you learn, and that's what allows you to apply what you have learned in the real world.
Yep. And different courses teach you to think differently. Yeah. Right? A course in creative writing is very different than a course in calculus, for example, and both are teaching you to solve problems differently. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think moving on to sort of the what does education mean post education. We have one question here about what is more important, industry-driven academia or vice versa? And how do you ensure that such models sustain in India?
So, look, the problem is this interesting tension. So industry needs educated people to survive and do well. But industry would much rather prefer that people coming to them, quote unquote, hit the ground running. So this allows them to spend less time on their on their finishing school attributes, and therefore it's more profitable. The educational institution, on the other hand, would prefer and hope that they educate somebody who's capable of fitting himself or herself in multiple different jobs and multiple different industries, which means you will not hit the ground running anywhere, but you will be close to hitting the ground running. So I think there has to be some sort of a handshake which says, I don't expect your people to hit the ground running, but I expect them to be approximately close to that. And I will do, quote unquote, the finishing school attributes for these people, right? And this conversation has not happened. And that is fundamentally why there's a divide between what industry expects and what academia delivers. It's true in the US, except in certain fields like information technology, where what you learn is pretty close to what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Right? But in chemistry and other physical sciences or biology, what you learn is not always pretty close to what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think all universities are, continuing to sort of fine tune how they can get that balance right.
Right.
So another question that's come in is, one way to address the overwhelming demand for quality education at premier institutions is for those institutions to extend their scale and scope by opening new campuses around the world, run collaborative programs with local universities in high demand countries, and offer dual degrees. And they're asking, do you have any plans on those lines?
I don't know if I personally have plans on those lines, but I think it's a good idea. I think the best way I, as an experienced person, can be effective is not by spending all my experience in teaching one person, but in teaching 5 people, like teach the teacher. So the more teachers I teach, the more teachers they teach, and that's how you create exponential impact, right? So I'm a big fan of institutions like GEO after they've established themselves and they're credible and anchored very strongly to really help uplift other institutions, collaborations, and really scale their impact.
Yeah, and I think that's where the opportunities are in the future. And I think very much so far, it has been about universities. The first movers in this area have been universities in the West that have then established, collaborative programs in countries like India, China, and others.
Right.
I think as we look ahead to the next couple of decades, I think it'll be exciting to see, a lot more of those collaborations happening in both directions.
Right. So there's a question out here, why don't top universities invest and create campuses in India? Actually, I want to address that a little bit. So when I was in my earlier, previous years, I did try to create campuses in India, but there were 2 challenges. One was that the Indian government at that point had very difficult rules for foreign universities to operate in India because they had experienced some universities come in, take the money, don't deliver any courses, give you diplomas that are worth nothing, and then walk away. So they had bad experiences. But more recently, I think the Indian government has redone the Higher Education Act, and they have become more open and more liberal vis-a-vis foreign universities coming to India. So I'm about to be talking to the Indian ambassador in the US because he's looking for help in understanding and analyzing and evaluating these proposals when they come to India from foreign universities to establish campuses in India.
Great. And I think maybe just dialing back to what you and I were talking about a little while ago about digital inequality.
Right.
We've one question on how should universities and colleges in India deal with digital inequality among students, which has been further accentuated by the massive shift towards online and hybrid learning.
Right. So this is where I think GEO, both the company and the university, are marvelous examples. If you look at GEO, the company, it basically flattened the access space when it came to access to mobile telephones and access to quote unquote information over your mobile internet, right? Until then, the rates were very high. GEO comes in and basically flattens everything and creates unbelievable access that people had not thought about. And I think GEO would do the same in the university. I know since I'm on the governing council, it would be one of my goals to make sure that they provide very, great access to students, not just on their campus, but also when students go home. And these students might be coming from little villages. They might be coming from big towns or big cities. They could be coming from all over India, but they should have seamless access regardless of where they are from. So I think it would have to be some integration of great government policy on how IT infrastructure, telecom infrastructure set up in India, great companies like Reliance and their GEO product, and then great universities like GEO and others who would basically come together to improve access.
Great, and I think this is going to continue to be critically important in the years ahead.
Right, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. And I mean, this year has really just shown. I mean, we've just been doing some interviews for a scholarship program, and some of the students that we had interviewed. Told some amazing stories in terms of how they have managed this last year in terms of access to digital learning, and I think once you get that model right, the opportunities for, particularly for first-time university learners, will just be accelerated even further.
Right. And, people from lower income backgrounds, underserved people, they're actually very skilled at creating creative answers. And that is what we call jugaad in India. The Indian mind is really good at jugaad. We understand how to really solve problems with minimal resources. And I think this pandemic has done well there. Now, while we are at it, I also want to say, in the past, people always thought about foreign universities coming to India and making India a better place. There is great education in India. I mean, look, a lot of people in the US are of Indian origin, CEOs of companies, leaders of universities. There's no reason to believe that only a foreign university can come to India. I think Indian universities, given now the flattening of this infrastructure, can be in foreign countries delivering education. So I can easily imagine Geo could deliver education in the US and really compete with American universities, both in the US and in India.
Absolutely, and I think that's very much what I was thinking as well. But that's hopefully what we'll start to see in the next 20 years. More of that, more of that intellectual and academic, sharing and collaboration that's happening, in all directions and cross borders. Because I think there's a lot that Indian universities will be able to contribute to the world as well.
Absolutely. Now, remember, look, we're not old enough and I've not read history enough, but back in the 1800s or maybe 1700s, India and China had 65% of the world GDP. So the state we are in is not the state we were in 200, 300 years ago. So there is a future which is different than where we are right now, where the Indian university, the oldest university in the world was the Indian University, Nalanda. We could be back to a point where we could be the center of knowledge all over again, both creation and dissemination.
And I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of innovation that is, emerging, in India, which I think has, different lessons for the rest of the world as well. I mean, I speak as someone who works in Mumbai, but originally from the UK, and over the last couple of years, some of the pace of even pre-pandemic, some of the pace of digital change that we're seeing in India is leaps and bounds ahead of in other countries.
Right. I mean, look, there are Indian AI companies in education that are leap years ahead of the American companies, like Baiju, for example, is an example of an Indian company that lives in India. There's another company out here in networking that I'm involved with that came from India and moved to Silicon Valley. Unbelievable technology. So I think we underestimate the talent base out there. The more access we create, the more we will expose the talent.
Yeah. And the more, diversity of thought that we'll have within academia and within research, which will only foster better innovation.
Absolutely, completely true.
So one other question that's come through is, what are your views on industry practitioners making a contribution to academia, maybe even as full-time teachers after a robust stint in the specific industry?
I am extremely supportive of that view. I think it enhances the quality of education. When you bring somebody after they retire from, let's say, either a technical or a management position and have them teach courses, it leads to a better experience, leads to a better trained student. So in our university, we have something called the professor of practice. And the professor of practice is exactly that person. We are not looking for publications, but we are looking for great experience that you bring to our academic enterprise.
And do you think that's something that's possible across the board, or is it easier in, say, STEM subjects rather than, say, art subjects?
Well, I think it should be across the board. I tell you, for example, our faculty in our department of music, right, one of the top 3 departments in the world, really that good. Basically, most of them are also performers in symphonies and operas and other professional organizations, right? They play music in movies, they play music on Broadway. And I can just go down the list. We have the same in our theater and dance department. Same is true in our visual arts, where these are artists that are also residents in other artistic environments. So I'm a strong believer in bringing practice to the campus.
I think it also helps with, bringing in, that element of real world application as well, and the insights they can bring in terms of that.
Right, absolutely. I would much rather have somebody teaching my students poetry who's been a poet and not necessarily a PhD in poetry. The young woman who read poetry at Biden's inauguration. I mean, unbelievably talented.
She was amazing.
You know what I'm saying? So there's
Yeah.
no reason why you need a PhD to teach. I mean, if you're talented, creative, and you have produced artifacts of knowledge, you should be allowed to disseminate them. And education is dissemination.
Absolutely. Great. So I'm trying to get through as many of the questions that have come through, and everyone in the audience has been sending quite a few, and please continue to send them in. I think going back to what does this mean when we're thinking about the future skills for educators. We have a question which is asking, as an educator involved in higher education, the one thing I see as a challenge is the ability to communicate as effectively as I would do in a face-to-face space. The
Right.
teaching and learning that can be accomplished within a limited time period in face-to-face environment is much higher than in an online space. And they'd love to hear your thoughts and advice on that.
Look, indeed true, right? So when it comes to teaching, whether it's online or in person, I think great delivery or transmission of knowledge needs a couple of conditions to be fulfilled. That you, as the individual, are on top of the subject matter you're teaching others, number one. And number two, you understand how to communicate. Two different things.
Mm-hmm.
I know what I know, and I can tell you what I know, but it doesn't mean I'm communicating to you what I know. And in communicating to you, I have to understand your learning modalities. I have to understand how you think about the issues. And in a classroom of 40, there might be 40 different learning modalities, right? So a great teacher is one who basically addresses the needs of everybody at the same time. I know it sounds impossible. So I'm a big fan. I think taking courses in public speaking, I think taking courses even in acting, to be honest with you, we joke about it, we are sarcastic about it, is not a bad idea, because the human being at the receiving end has to be intrigued, and you need to grab their mind share. And it's not easy to grab somebody's mind share. Right?
Definitely.
It's just like theater.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's those softer skills, which, definitely stand you in good stead.
Mm-hmm. And, we joke about it. We're sarcastic. Oh, I'm a PhD. I know everything. I don't need to do this. But I think it should all be part of our education system. We need it,
Yeah.
even if I'm not a teacher, even when I'm working in industry and I'm giving a presentation to my boss. In some sense, I'm teaching her what I know and why she should be investing in this project.
Yeah. And those communication skills and those ways of social interacting can be just so critical to your success. Right. So I think sort of building on that, we have another question, which is, Dr. Khosla, don't you think that today's education is overemphasizing on employment rather than focusing on the inner self?
The fact is that it is true, but one has to ask oneself, in the old days, when the education was meant primarily for Brahmins and for people from quote unquote higher echelons of society, making a living was not their worry. Somehow they had enough food and they had enough living that they were making. So education became a goal unto itself. Today, we not only need to nourish our soul, we also need to nourish our body, and then as in put food on the table, nourish our families, and make a living. So in my mind, there's nothing wrong with focusing on both, not just one or the other.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they both it's getting that balance right, because they
Yeah.
they both have a place to play. They both have a place to play. Yeah.
Exactly. And the educational institutions also should be thinking that way. I'm not saying we only teach the citizen of the future. We also teach the worker of the present. You need to
Yeah.
teach both the citizen and the worker simultaneously.
And I also think, fundamentally though, higher education is expensive, and it is a privilege. So for most students, they do still have to think about, how is this going to help me in my future employment prospects, because I'm investing X amount of money, X amount of years of my life, etc.
And look, if you're a first generation, and let's say your parents were making, I'm just going to make up a number, like 1 lakh rupees a year, and that was the income, for you to now pay 3 lakhs a year of tuition, it actually creates a mental dissonance, because that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right? So one has to understand where these people are coming from. One needs to understand who is it that you're educating. And I think very often universities and educators, we create a model for ourselves and we basically lose touch with reality. And we need to be real about who are we educating, why are we educating, how is it impacting. If you're using taxpayer money, it has to impact the taxpayer in a good way.
Definitely. And I think, picking up on the point of who are we educating, we've been speaking a lot about first generation learners, and making sure that we have that diversity and increasing access. We just had another question that's come in, which is looking at the other angle of diversity. So what are some of the initiatives that universities and institutions for higher education can take to augment the percentage of female students specifically at postgraduate and doctoral levels?
I mean, look, that access is a function of partly society and social issues, which I think India is getting better and better at. I think women are more involved and integrated in the workforce. It is also a function of who's teaching, because most of these people, if they're senior people, are more likely than not men. They need to change their attitude, how they address people, how they talk about issues. It's well understood that there's areas that are interesting to women and others that may not be. Social impact, for example. So you can teach great engineering with social impact, or you can teach a dry form of engineering as mathematics, and so one has to really, again, think about who is it that we are teaching, what goals are we trying to serve. And I think not involving women and not integrating women in the workforce is leaving out half the population, and you cannot be a great economy by leaving out half the population.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Khosla. And I think what I'm also really hopeful for the future is that now with more opportunities for blended learning as well,
Yep.
it will create more opportunities for women to participate in the workforce, particularly after they've had families where often there is a shortfall. And I think what the last year has shown is, and honestly, it's not just women, but men as well, and how families have had to juggle their responsibilities between both parents, not just working from home, but teaching from home as well, their kids. And I think socially, families and men and women have really developed a lot in this period.
Right.
And if we can continue that, it'll be great, not just for participation in employment, but also higher education opportunities for women as well, not feeling like they have to put it off.
Right, and online education, I think, would also create more access for women who come from Orthodox families who may not want the women to go out. I'm not saying that is right or wrong, but that's just the way they are. But online education allows them to really be part of the workforce. Not only online education, the work is also becoming online. So there's a lot of careers that are going to be online going forward, right? Not everything you don't have to go to work physically every day in a bus. And in a country like India, where the physical infrastructure is kind of mediocre at best, or maybe weak, where the public transportation is not always the best and always overcrowded. Online work, especially for women who come from Orthodox families, can create opportunities that don't exist right now.
Mm, definitely.
No, Vanita, not to interrupt, but one thing
No, please
that
do.
one thing that Dr. Khosla brought up early today, which I think is, it's not just blended learning, it's interactive blended learning.
Exactly.
I think that is the crux of success. I never thought of this word before, because otherwise in blended learning, it can be very passive. The teacher just saying people are doing things. The more you can interact, and that is the model of the future, and particularly for women, they like to open up. So when there is an interaction there, they feel more comfortable sharing their views and perspectives than others. Sorry for the interruption, but I think that
No,
was a
no,
very,
this is
very
great. See, that tells me you're a great teacher and you're a great student because you're listening carefully and this is exactly, no, you have a great interpretation.
And the second thing, just what you said, when somebody asks you this question about when we teach something, how important is the application aspect of the teaching, the relevance of what you are teaching. And I think I like the way you responded. And one question that I always get, the same thing in management education also. So when people ask me this question, what do you teach in business schools? When we go to take a class in physics, we know they teach physics, chemistry, and others. Same thing in math. So I have a very simple way to characterize it. I say that in business schools, what we teach our students is how you put structure on unstructured problems. So structured thinking. And Vanita, you brought a concept called the critical thinking. So actually the role of the teacher is to emphasize the thinking aspect, go deeper into that, then the relevance part will automatically come out. The more deeply you think, you can see the connections.
Right.
Sorry,
There's a question. Now, this is actually great, Deepak. So there's a question here about not everybody has the same intellect, and what's your suggestion about slow learning, slow learners? I think here, let me just give a little lecture on biases and discrimination. Not everybody is born to be an Olympic 100-meter runner, right? So the people who are not running at 100-meter speeds with the way they're at Olympic speeds doesn't mean they're left behind. They do interesting things with their capacity. So when we think about slow learners, when we think about learning disabilities, discarding these people and putting them on the side is the biggest mistake society can make. These are human beings that are born with different attributes. So we got to understand, how do we take advantage of their attributes and integrate them into the workforce? The workforce needs everybody.
Absolutely.
If everybody in the workforce was an Einstein, the workforce would be a disaster. Right? So
yeah. No, absolutely. And it's about how do we support them, but also how do we nurture the specific different skills and ways of thinking that they have. Great. So, Dr. Jain, thank you for your interjection. I think it was a great interjection, and I think you're spot on, because when we think about pre-pandemic, as we were saying, there's all of these things existed. We did have blended learning before, we did have online courses before, but what has really been different this year has been that how these have become interactive. And I think that's the and that's where we've all learned, as you were saying, Dr. Khosla, different ways of how do you interact digitally, how do you not just body language, but also ways of sharing and discussing, etc. And I think that's definitely one of the positives for the future.
Indeed, true. Let's see, what are the other questions that our audience has?
What advice do you have to educators to navigate the increasing polarization that has emerged socially and politically?
So I don't know if I can give any advice here, because this is just the way society has become. But I think the way to think about this is, if you just think about an educational institution where you should be able to ask any question and argue all sorts of, all different parts of that question and different aspects of that answer, right? If that's what we are teaching, we are good. But if we become dogmatic and political in our teaching, so for example, if we start teaching, let's say we're teaching courses in society, and we talk about the greatness of uh, Hinduism in society, and forget that there are, in a secular society like India, there are multiple religions, then that's what creates polarization, where we only focus on one aspect of an issue. So my view is we should use the issues as exemplars and focus on critical thinking and questioning as what we are learning how to question, not what the answer is.
Definitely, definitely.
Yes, no, that's a very good point.
And I think taking a slightly different direction, but also on the point of how do we go beyond the sort of regular boundaries. We had one question earlier, which was, what are your views about a portfolio career? And actually, this is something that I remember as when I was an undergraduate many years ago. We had a talk by some of the alumni at our college, and they were all different ages. The oldest was 60, and the younger ones were in their 30s. And the lady who was 60 had been in one career, one company for her entire life, and she'd worked her way up to be on the board of directors. Whereas the ones that were in their 30s had already had 2 or 3 jobs and had switched careers in different fields, and they were talking about how now the future was all about portfolio careers and being able to move your transferable skills to take you in different directions. What are your thoughts about the future of portfolio careers?
So I think, again, education should address a spectrum of issues. The likelihood, look, I have been in 2 universities all my life. But even when I look at it that way, you can say, wait a second, you'd never had multiple careers. But if you look at my research has changed every 5 years. What I did for my PhD, I had no clue right now. And now, like every 5 years, I change my issues, what problems I address, what areas I work on. My job changes every 5-7 years. So I have had multiple careers in the same organization. So what I'm trying to say is, just because you're in one organization does not mean you had one career. Very few people, unless you are in, how should I say this, in a working type of industry where you're, let's say, doing assembly on the shop floor and you never upskill yourself, you might end up doing assembly for 30 years. But that's why education is so important, because it allows you the flexibility to upskill, reskill, and move towards different jobs and different opportunities as the economy changes and as society changes.
So we've been talking a lot about change, and I think we've probably got about 5 more minutes before I wrap up the questions. But I see all the lovely the books on your table, Dr. Khosla, and we've been talking a lot about digital as well. What do you see as the future of books, like the physical books? As you've got your new undergraduates coming in. We're all,
right.
Everyone's learning digitally. Do you think, we still have a future for the traditional books as well?
So I think the future of books, like I was talking earlier, would be like books that are digital and interactive. Books that have lectures, speeches, simulations, everything integrated in that format, right? Now,
Yeah.
So that would be the future of books, or at least textbooks. From my perspective, I still, believe it or not, don't have a Kindle. I have an iPad, but I don't use my iPad for reading books. I still have these physical, you see back here, books that I have in a stack to read. I pick up, I take on a plane. I still like the physical feel of a book in my hand. But I'm an old person in that sense, right? I should actually buy a Kindle. It's much easier on the eye. It's better to read. It's more flexible. I see a whole lot of positive attributes. I'm just like an old person who's not ready to change all his behaviors. Even though I work in information technology at the cutting edge of research in IT, This behavior, I refuse to change, at least up to now.
Well, I think that's not a bad thing. I'm definitely a lover of the physical books as well, and it's nice to have a break from the screen as well. So Dr. Khosla, we had one question earlier, which was when you look at the next 12 months, what do you see the key challenges and opportunities are? And I think both for students and also for academics.
So I think the next 12 months like this fall quarter, for example, for us would be a transient where the faculty who refuse to do online are now so used to online because they can be sitting in Spain and delivering the course in San Diego, don't want to come back on campus. So there is this reverse transition that has to happen for the faculty. Mm-hmm. Students who are used to listening to recorded courses and sleeping till 2 p.m. And now there might be an 8 a.m. class. I think there'll be a whole lot of transients happening during the fall. I think come winter will be more like 90% normal. Come spring, if the virus has gone away, we'll be back to life as usual. And a great exemplar for me is 1918. None of us were born then. The same thing happened in 1918. There was a pandemic, just no different from this pandemic. Literally, if you go read the books about that pandemic, exactly what's happening now is happened then. We just forgot about how to deal with this. Fast forward, it's as if nothing had happened. Like fast forward to 1945, nothing had happened, right? So I think we're going to see the same thing out here. We're going to learn, but the real learning in this will be some great developments in vaccine. For example, the mRNA vaccine is going to become the mode of vaccine creation for a whole bunch of diseases, right? So those are the learnings we will keep, but our behavior will come back to the normal behavior, I think.
I think that's definitely the historical example for us all to hold on to, because it was a difficult few years with the 1918 flu, but then after that you had the roaring 20s where life went back to normal and people had a lot of fun.
Yep, and that's what's happening right now. In the next year or two, that's what's going to happen. And I tell you, I cannot wait till travel starts and I can travel to India unfettered by the fear of the pandemic, because I enjoy my trips to India, not just to see my family, but it's like, I just love being there. So can't wait.
Brilliant. No, me too. And Dr. Khosla, I hope we can perhaps have a repeat of this session, maybe next year, and as a face-to-face session, and talking about how things have gone. Happy to do it. Great. Well, on that note, I think I could continue to chatting to you all day, but I'm sure we need to sort of wrap up. But thank you so much, Dr. Kosler.
And thank you, Vanita, for your very insightful and incisive questions. Dr. Jain, thank you, sir, for your interjections and for your introduction. I've been a great admirer of Deepak Jain ever since when I was a student. He was a faculty, and he was famous then. And then I become famous, and he's more famous now. So I've always been a great admirer. And
Vanita, we belong to a society called Society of Mutual Admiration.
That's right. But now Geo Institute amazingly brings us together to work on a project that we both share as a passion and as philosophically what should be happening in the country.
And a common purpose, a common purpose.
Exactly.
Yes. And Vanita, Dr. Khosla is a member of our governing council, and we had that meeting yesterday under the chairmanship of Mrs. Neeta Ambani. It was a very informative meeting. So he is going to help us build the institute.
Wonderful. And we're all very much looking forward to seeing you soon, Dr. Khosla, back in India.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Good
night, people in India, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever else.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khosla. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I mean, I must say one thing before we end this. We've had these webinars before as well. I think this is by far the most interactive webinar that I have at least witnessed. There have been just way too many questions. I mean, there are still many questions we haven't taken because there isn't time. So I just like to request my senior. Sorry, sir, please go ahead.
I wanted to apply interactive blended learning. So we are online interaction. So I wanted to put into practice what Dr. Khosla said.
In action.
Absolutely, sir. So if I could quickly request my senior colleague, Mrs. Prerna Gupta, to give the closing remarks before we end.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Khosla, Dr. Jain, and Dr. Sharma to be a part of today's session. I just also want to thank the audience who are joining us from different locations around the world. Through these webinars and events, it's our endeavor to bring global experts, much like Dr. Khosla, to the audience here to foster discussion on issues of importance in higher education. And on behalf of the entire team at Geo Institute, it gives me immense pleasure to extend heartfelt thanks to Chancellor Pradeep Kosler for an
Thank you.
engaging and highly interactive and unfettered session, sir. It's been a privilege. I personally always enjoy your very direct and insightful views. Thank you so much once again. As Sanchayan said, a very interactive session. We have over 50 questions still unanswered. We hope that we are able to answer them subsequently. Thank you, audience, also for sharing your questions. Digital adoption in higher education has evolved significantly, especially over the last 1 year. We see an interaction session today. It has brought the world closer and made global experts more accessible. So we hope to see, many more of such talks from global experts. Also, as Dr. Khosla rightly said, India can indeed be a global leader in this space, and India's illustrious ancient higher education can be a beacon for its future. And we eagerly look forward to more innovation in this space coming from institutions in India. With this, I would also like to take this opportunity to express profound gratitude to our visionary founders, Mrs. Ambani and Mr. Ambani, and also the institutional leadership, Dr. Mashelkar and Dr. Jain. Thank you, sirs. Thank you once again for your commitment to create this world-class institution for India. We have a series of exciting events lined up, and we look forward to seeing you all join us virtually and in person in the coming year. We hope for in-person events very soon. And with that, I would like to conclude this session and wish you all a very pleasant evening or a day, wherever you are. Follow our social media space for more updates. Thank you.
Thank you.